Hello, my name is Jean-Jacques Nantel. Most people hate to hear that all the money they put for decades in their pension fund was in fact a disguised tax that was used to pay the pensions of those who were already retired. They also hate hearing that because they now know that the pension funds they were counting on for their own retirement will soon be empty. And they dislike it because they realize they have been fooled again by politicians. Originally, when governments created the pension system, it was to solve some very urban problems. For instance, the fact that most city dwellers are too short-sighted to save for retirement by themselves, or the fact that in a city, women as well as men are too busy to take care of old people, or the fact that in a modern society, many elderly people are alone, without any kids, and without resources. At first, it seemed a very good idea to create a pension system, since humans, until the beginning of the 20th century, didn't live much more than 70 years on average. The proportion of young people was so large in the population that the system promised to be pretty cheap. The only real problem, as usual, was to convince the taxpayers to pay for it. The solution was simple. Politicians told them that the system would create a huge reserve of money that would be reimbursed to them after their retirement with a huge profit. That lie was so efficient that from then onward, everybody was pretty happy to finance the system. The scheme couldn't be more clever because that disguised tax was taken immediately, only to be reimbursed, supposedly, 20, 30 or 40 years later. The financial community couldn't be happier because the system would create a continuous flow of new money that they would be able to exploit to make enormous profits. For workers, the system had another advantage. It reduced their family obligation because their parents and their grandparents were receiving enough money to live in their own home and could pay for their own expenses. Everybody started to believe in Santa Claus. Workers started to believe that the 8, 10 or 12% taken off their salaries during 35 years would be enough for them to live comfortably during the 20 or 25 years they would spend in retirement. And when somebody like me told them that it was ridiculous to believe in such a fairy tale, they retorted, "If you think there will not be enough money in our fund when we will retire, it's because you forget that the large corporations we work for also contribute to the fund." I forgot nothing. What those people fail to understand is that the money companies put in their pension fund really belongs to them. It's a part of what they are paid for their work. In other words, when a labor union negotiates a better employer contribution to a pension fund, it is always by accepting lower salaries. There is no way out here. It's an economic law. If a company pays more for its workers than its competitors, it will sooner or later be forced to close its door or to move in a country where salaries and benefits are lower. This is precisely the reason why so many Western companies have moved their factories in countries like Mexico, China, or India. Moving a factory, and it's the same thing when a company starts using robots, always has a huge impact on a pension plan because it reduces the number of contributing employees as well as the overall employer contribution. In other words, 2 of the 3 founding sources of the plan disappear at the same time. There is more. Sometimes a company has the legal right to stop contributing to the pension funds of its employees if it is very profitable. It is called a contribution holiday, which means that sometimes companies don't even pay what they owe to their employees. And don't forget that those companies take the money now and not 30 years in the future like their workers. Even if an enterprise doesn't move its factories abroad and keeps paying its contribution to the pension fund, it doesn't change the fact that the very concept of our modern pension system is flawed, since everything the employees and the employer invest in it is normally less than a quarter of what the workers earn. When they hear that, some always retort, "Whoa, don't forget that the investments made with the fund produce profits for 30 years or more." And they start talking about the beautiful curves their pension plan managers send them and that show the regular growth of their retirement money. Well, let's start from the beginning. The main reason why the modern pension funds kept growing for decades is because the parents of the baby boomers had many kids. In other words, during all those years, there were many more workers putting cash into the system than retirees who took money out of it. Now, if we talk about the profits made by investing the money of your pension funds, here again, there is no Santa Claus because it's an economic law. The greater the profit you make, the greater the risk you take. People just don't realize that the expert who manage their money, even their personal savings, often justify the juicy management fees they charge by taking more risks. In clear, their customers take all the risks while they receive their fat paycheck every 2 weeks, rain or shine. Here again, we find the same operating principle. They take their cut now and often, while workers must wait 10, 20 or 30 years before touching the very first dollar of everything they invested. And to make sure that they would not be bothered too often by their customers, the pension fund managers send them every year a thick, glassy report that is written in a gibberish that is so technical and boring that almost nobody reads it. And within that document, they hide the management fees they charge. And you know what? It is proven that the experts who manage your money, even your private money, are not only useless but harmful, since the financial returns they get are inferior to the financial returns you would get yourself by investing in passive funds. Passive funds are funds that were designed to follow the ups and downs of Wall Street without ever buying or selling actions. Rumor has it that many financial experts put their own personal savings in that kind of funds. Like it or not, the high returns of your pension funds during the last decades were due to investments made in very profitable but risky countries like China or Puerto Rico, or in even more dangerous financial products like derivatives. No wonder that so many pension funds lost a lot of money when the dot-com bubble burst in 2001 or during the subprime crisis of 2008. Since almost nothing has been done since 2008 to correct the flaws of the financial system, the same thing will almost inevitably happen again during the next financial crisis. And those who will then get in touch with their financial advisor will be told that it was a pure bad luck that the market had crashed, which will of course be a pure lie, since all the traders of the world know that the crashes are regular and inevitable in a market economy. Now, if we forget about all the fairy tales told by the financial community and we come back on planet Earth, it's very easy to show that since the dawn of civilization, young people always paid the expenses of their retired parents and of their own children. That extremely ancient safety net is called the family, the only working communist system the world has ever known. Our modern pension system only changed the way, not the fact, that young people always paid and will always pay for the elderly. It's not that difficult to understand. There were never on the planet warehouses where people stored the food, the clothes, and the other goods they would consume after their retirement. All over the world, old people always consume the goods produced recently by their own working children. This is the reason why the big numbers you find in your pension plan reports are nothing else but numbers. And numbers that signify nothing if there will not be enough young people in your country to support you in your old age. The example of my own family confirms what I just said, since all my great-grandparents who reached retirement age lived in their children's home because there was no pension system then. Things began to change with my grandparents, who were the first to benefit from the modern pension system. For instance, my grandfather, who died at the age of 98, was able to live in his own home till the end because he received money from his pension plan. What is interesting to know here is that he retired only 2 weeks after the implementation of the pension system. Being an accountant, he kept bragging for years that for the few dollars he put in his pension plan, he received much more than $100,000. If you calculate well, you will find out that his return on investment was much more than 1,000,000%. 1,000,000%. How was it possible? Simple. My grandfather had 6 kids and almost 30 grandchildren who all put money into the system. The system also worked well for my parents, who had 8 working children. Children who were told and believed they were investing money in their own pension plan, when in fact they were paying money indirectly to their parents. The real but hidden truth here was that their pension funds were not investment funds for their own retirement, but transfer funds that were used to pay the pensions of the preceding generations. As I said before, it was a disguised tax. If, nowadays, all our pension funds, public and privates, are almost empty, it is because the baby boomers didn't make enough kids. At the beginning of the 21st century, there are not enough young people who put money into the system compared to the retirees who benefit from it. One of the consequences of that imbalance is that the few babies who are born today will pour fortunes into their pension funds during decades, while knowing all along that they will be totally empty when they will retire. If we ended up in such a dire situation, it is because very often those who put money into the system are not those who empty it. With the present system, the families who have many kids, many future pension providers, must pay alone all the cost of raising them, while millions of childless citizens are told that after their retirement they will have the legal right to exploit the work of other people's children. If it is okay to pay for people who remain childless against their will, it is totally unfair in the case of people who did that on purpose. Those selfish citizens clearly know they are pure parasites, since they keep repeating that to refill the coffers of the system, the government should increase the contributions of those who are still working, which means other people's children. Those parasites are often the same who kept complaining all their lives about the noise made by their neighbors' children. Did the governments know when they created the pension system that it wouldn't work on the long term? Of course they knew, but since politicians were elected for only 4 years, it was in their interest to lie to their electors without taking care about the long-term consequences of their actions. The contempt for the everything long-term is the main defect of the democratic system, the flaw that normally provokes its decadence and its replacement by another political system, normally a dictatorship whose first job is to correct the long-term problems created by the irresponsible politicians who preceded them. This is the almost inevitable outcome in a universe where all living things and all societies are condemned to die if they don't produce more than they consume. Since all our pension funds will soon be empty, politicians all over the world end up using the very same tricks to postpone the inevitable collapse of the system. They start by delaying the retirement age. Then, they eliminate the pension rights of a dead retiree's spouse. And finally, they declare nil any pension plan clause that tie the retiree's benefits with the inflation rate. Most modern governments will soon be forced to use those tricks because their coffers are empty. For too long, for decades in fact, the welfare mentality has spread in the population with the ever-increasing number of very costly social programs. Civil servants, for example, especially those who can create major disturbances in the society, often try to get a better collective agreement by striking at the worst possible moment. Think about the garbage collectors, for example. Since politicians don't spend their own money and only want to survive the next election, they often buy time by conceding to those civil servants salaries and benefits that other workers can only dream of. Yes, it's true. It's very important to pay very well civil servants, especially those who are powerful and who could be tempted by corruptions, judges, policemen, or politicians, for example. For a country, nothing is more detrimental than corruption because it wastes the taxes paid by the population to build the roads, the bridges, and all the public services they need to produce wealth. During the last 50 years, all the population, not only the civil servants, became dependent of the costly programs of the government. And to pay for it, politicians got used to take the money from the future generations. They simply stopped allocating enough money to repair the infrastructure. The result of it is that the infrastructure is crumbling everywhere, especially in North America. In 2014, a large city like Montreal allocated only half the budgets necessary to repair the most damaged parts of its sewer system. The same year, we learned that 30% of the water distributed by the city was lost due to leakages. The problem is so important that in 2017, the Canadian government decided to spend $125 billion to repair the Canadian infrastructure. In USA, it was $1 trillion. By the way, I remind you that you can always verify the data I use with the internet bibliography I always put at the end of my videos. Another trick used by politicians to finance their follies has been to create gigantic national debts nobody will ever be able to repay. It's true they had no other options, since a lot of enterprises and factories that used to pay taxes in the Western world had already been moved to Mexico, China, or elsewhere in order to reduce their costs and increase their profits. These days, rich countries are more and more paralyzed by a series of systemic deficits like that. Budget deficits, trade balance deficits, pension deficits, fertility deficits, etc. The present situation is clearly unsustainable and will inevitably end up in a collapse. Politicians are aware of it, and as a result, they took multiple measures to make sure that during the next financial crisis, they will be able to take the money where it has been artificially concentrated and frozen in your pension funds, for example. Anyway, in many countries, governments took control of all those funds long ago by concentrating all that frozen money in very large public institutions. Institutions whose mandates had very little to do with maximizing the retirees' money. For example, they were ordered to invest only inside the country and nowhere else, or to buy the government bonds when no private buyers could be found. When future retirees realize that their pension system is doomed because there are not enough young people to pay for it, they often say that the government should increase immigration because, of course, immigrants are modern slaves who will come here by the millions to pay our mountains of debts, to repair the infrastructure we let to rot for decades, or to replenish our empty pension funds. I'm very sorry, but immigrants come here to become rich and not to be exploited. After the next crash, the productive ones will refuse to come here. And don't forget that almost every nation on the planet is getting richer and has stopped having many kids. Very soon on the planet, there will be very few immigration candidates. When people understand that, they sometimes say, well, if they don't pay our pensions, there will be trouble. Oh yeah? And how will you make that revolution? With walkers and wheelchairs? Because the main reason why people retire is because they have become too old, sick, or weak to work or to fight. They have become prey. Anyway, don't bother. Politicians will come to your rescue, especially before every election. To get your votes, they will probably double or triple your pensions. How will they do that? With their empty coffers? Very simple. They will give you the billions of dollars their central bank will create out of thin air, which of course will create inflation. Wow, what about that little inflation? Some will say. No, it will not be a little inflation because that inflation will only be added to all the inflation the governments will create to compensate for all the deficits we just talked about. The result of it all will be to create hyperinflation that will very soon reduce to almost zero whatever the governments will have given to you. Normally, hyperinflation has a very detrimental effect on a society, but at least it has one important advantage. It corrects many injustices created by the laws, the collective agreement, and the universal safety net offered by the state without taking into account the economic value of each individual. In a crisis, the revenues of each person is submitted to the law of supply and demand, which favors those who are really useful. It's a process of natural selection. Those who thrive in such an environment are the most competent, efficient, and productive workers. People whose professions are really useful and always in high demand, for doctors, for example. Those who were clever enough to prepare themselves well in advance for the crisis, etc. On the other hand, the biggest losers are the parasites, the laziest and most useless individuals, those who lived on welfare or on a fixed income, pensioners for example, those whose big salaries was due to the protection of powerful labor unions, etc. Unfortunately, there is no quick fix for our pension system, since all the imaginable solutions imply a long-term action. There are simply not enough young people to support our ever-increasing population of retirees. And this is valid all over the world, since the fertility rate are falling, especially in the South. In the future, only people who will have children to take care of them, who will be debt-free, and who will have properties to sell, will be able to retire. All the others will be forced to keep working for as long as possible. It already happened in USA with the retirees who lost everything in the subprime crisis of 2008. What about our pension? Poof! They will disappear in a puff of smoke. Am I happy about it? Of course not, since I will also be caught in that mess. But this is life. Welcome to the real world. In the present video, I didn't talk about your rights and freedom, but about an economic fact that never stopped being true. No children, no retirement, and no pensions, or almost none. It was criminal to let the baby boomers believe that without making any children, they would be able to maintain their high standard of living by spending the dollars that were piling up miraculously on the sheets of paper sent to them by their pension plan managers. Politicians. As usual, I thank you in advance to recommend this video to your friends. See you next time.